Alright everybody, we are at the bitter end of global edits in Lightroom. And the last two panels that I want to show you are not the most crucial or critical panels to master, but there's some useful stuff in there. So I just got done doing the detail, sharpening, noise reduction, so I'm going to close that panel, and I'm going to go down to transform. The transform panel is a complete mystery to me, and it is insane, and I would not recommend it, but we'll go through it just for entertainment. So it is a way to distort your image, and every time I've tried to use it, it is like kind of like applying 17 gallons worth of glue to something. It's just like way too heavy-handed for me. I don't know. Maybe you might know more about it than I do. So we can just experiment with it. We can transform things. We can stretch it vertically, right? We can do X offset, Y offset. X offset moves things left to right. Y offset moves them up, down. Weird. I don't know why you'd really need that. Scale, we could zoom into a photo. We could zoom out of a photo. So we're just distorting it, right? We're distorting our photo. We can rotate it, aspect ratio. Once again, I don't know why you would do it in here. I would do it in the crop tool, right? That's how we did it at the beginning of this editing. But, right, you can do this stuff down here. The thing that I do want to show you, let's turn that off. The thing that I do want to show you is when we do manipulate these things, notice that our photo no longer becomes a rectangle. We start getting these weird little slices in the corners. If we select constrain crop, it will then make, no matter what you do, it will stick within those binding boxes. So, not the most useful thing. It could be useful, I guess, if you were taking photographs of architecture and you really wanted to get really straight lines, and you didn't know how to use the. Oh my God, my photo's messed up again. Let me see if I can fix this thing. Yeah, I just messed it up. But I'm gonna get it back to normal. But I did just want to show you this is the transform dialog box. Go ahead and use it if you want. It's kind of way too much for me to understand. I'm gonna pause this video and we're gonna be back with a little bit more useful information. Okay, so I have been wrestling around with the transform dialog box. Spoiler alert, this is not something that I ever use, but I did think that it would be a useful time to show you how we can go back in time if we have made a mistake, which I clearly have, because remember that photo of the shot up rusty barrel? Here it is now based on me wrestling with the transform box. So if you end up on this crazy wrestling match with the transform edit, you can always go to history, and you have the history of all of these things that you have done to your photos. All the way down, if I scroll all the way down, to when you imported it. Okay? So I'm going to go, let's see where I want to go before. I've edited this photo a couple times. But if we go, we're clicking back on all the mistakes that I made in the awesome transform dialog box. And constrain crop. That actually is where we started. So you can always click back in the history tab, which I think is super helpful. So now that we've done that, let us get out of the transform dialog box and never use that again. Go ahead, try it if you want. Okay, so we're going to move on to something that might be a little bit more useful for you, and that's the effects. So the effects is a way to add a vignette to your photos. So when I'm talking about a vignette, I mean darkening the edges of your photograph to draw attention to the center of it. So that's historically how vignettes have been made, but you could also do a light vignette. It kind of creates this like dreamy type image. And so by moving the slider to the left, it's making a dark vignette. To the right, it's making a light vignette. So by default, it's set at this nice feathery, kind of diffused vignette. Something I think that could be cool though is if you made a white vignette and then go down to the feather slider and bring it all the way to the left, you now have this hard edge vignetted portrait. This is like a 19th century portrait vignette right there. So you could do that. So feather at 100% is this nice diffused edge, and the feather at 0 is a nice hard edge. You could do that with light or dark if you wanted an oval photo. That's totally up to you. I am going to bring the feather back up pretty high, and I'm going to just do a kind of darkening of the edges. Nothing too extreme, but just a little bit like that. So, right, there's before, there's after. So midpoint, you can also shift the midpoint. So right now, with the midpoint all the way to the left, it's picking the middle of the photo. If we shift out, it's pushing that midpoint from the center of the photo out to the edges. Roundness, same thing. It's getting into like real subtle adjustments of your vignette. So if we went amount, let's bump this up a ton and see what roundness does, right? So we could have a really square vignette or really round vignette. That's all personal preference, and it's probably, kind of goofy to mess around with. But actually, let's do this, and let's bring feather down to 0, and let's see how we can make weird borders. We could have rounded borders of our photo like that. That's actually kind of cool. We could have different types of oval photographs. I think that's kind of would be fun to play with, something like this. So totally up to you how you use this tool, but I think it's, it's kind of cool. I'm going to actually just bring everything back to 0 here, and I'm going to make my dark vignettes with the feather up a little bit higher, something like that. So once again, after, before. It just kind of draws your attention to the center of the photo. This is like a portrait that I made of this little rusty shot up barrel. Okay, so now we're going to move on to grain. So this is something that I've noticed students really like, and I think it has to do with, in a previous video I mentioned that a lot of young students, that have grown up with digital tools and digital technology have had these like perfect image making devices in our pockets at all times. You hit the button and a perfect picture comes out. And you actually want there to be like some type of imperfection in your photos. You want, you've seen the photos of the past, of the 70s, 80s, and 90s that are these like discolored, kind of grungy drugstore prints, and you want to kind of add that flair to your digital photos, which you totally can right here. So grain just creates this pattern of grain over the top of your image. If you go really extreme with it, let's zoom in, you can see like that's pretty extreme. It looks like digital noise, but it's emulating the grain of silver gelatin prints or chrome prints that had actual chrome or silver on the film that created the grain. So that might be a little bit heavy-handed, but we could bump the grain up a little bit. You can change the size of the grain, make it bigger or smaller. Obviously, you're losing a little bit of detail when you do this, right? So here's me with the grain on. Here's it with the grain off. Look how detailed it is right there. With it on, it gets a little crazy. Now, you probably wouldn't go this extreme with it, so let's go down to a usable grain. Something like that has like a nice little texture to it. Roughness, I like to just slide these things all the way over and just see what it kind of does first, and then dial it in to be perfect. So I think that's kind of cool. I mean, it's got this like grainy, it looks like a print that was made in the darkroom. Right, turn it on, turn it off. So now it has a vignette and a little grain to it. So let's look at the grain up close, off, and on. So it kind of just gives it a little bit of a vibe. I think this is something that students like to use along with split filtering to kind of create that like discolored, damaged aesthetic a little bit. So the other thing, and the last thing that I want to show you in effects, is dehaze. Dehaze is a way of like making your images more like more saturated and more. So what it's doing is dehaze is saturating individual pixels, very similar to how Sharpen did that. It's creating the illusion of sharpening. Usually people use dehaze going to the left, where it gets more dreamy like. So that might be kind of extreme, but something like that to make it a little bit more dreamy. So that's how I usually see dehaze used, is to make your image softer, like more painterly, more picturesque. And most people don't use it to sharpen up your image because you usually do the sharpening with the sharpen tool. So dehaze, if you want to make a nice dreamy image, that's how you could do it. So that's how you use the effects tab. Go ahead and use it if it fits your aesthetic and you like it, go for it. It's not something that I use all the time, but it's kind of cool. So, okay, you've made it through all the global edits in Lightroom. You are a global editing master. And next module, we are going to move forward into local edits. That's when you're editing just a small portion of a photo on its own. Okay, see you there.